Welcome to this live webinar. My name is Paul Chorley. I am the co-founder and managing director of Autotest Pro. I'm delighted that you're all able to join me today to find out more about how to avoid 10 common and costly mistakes when selecting an automated testing solution for ServiceNow. Now, I've deliberately kept this webinar short today, as I know your time is precious, and that does mean, though, that we need to press on at quite a pace through the 10 points, but please feel free to contact us afterwards if you would like any further information or detail on anything we have covered in this webinar. I should also mention that you please submit questions as we go along, and I'll answer as many of those as time permits in the second half of the webinar. So let's get started. So I would assume most of you watching are already ServiceNow customers, so you're well aware of how configurable ServiceNow is to meet your business needs for service management, etc. However, we all know that when it comes to testing those configurations, the landscape becomes a lot less clear. There are many factors to consider, and it's really easy to become a bit confused with the choices that are available to you and the factors to consider. So recently, ServiceNow also introduced their own automated testing framework in Istanbul, and many people are coming to us to ask for advice on what it does, what this means, and how it should fit within their overarching testing strategy. Other confusing factors when making a selection is whether you should do an internal test automation project, for example, or buy an off-the-shelf tool. Where does DevOps fit with automated testing, and so on? There's lots of things to consider. So we want to help clarify the situation and seek to provide a sort of map to help you navigate the complexity and avoid the pitfalls. And we've also written and published a white paper, and this is downloadable from our website. I'll give you details of how to do this later on. So let's get started. Number one, user interface versus script testing. The single biggest mistake to avoid when selecting an automated testing solution is to ensure that you select a tool that tests exactly what it is you are seeking to test. Now, I know that sounds a bit obvious, but unfortunately it isn't, and it's quite complex. So this animation on these slides attempt to explain the difference. ServiceNow, as we know, is a browser-based application, and this first image that you see represents what the user sees. Your end users click on buttons, select from drop-downs, fill in fields, and so on. However, underlying this layer that this user sees are JavaScript code functions written mostly by ServiceNow, but of course you can amend those and add to them. These do certain things when you interact with the user interface. So it makes sense that if you want to test what your users will be doing in ServiceNow, you need to select an automated test tool that mimics exactly the user's interaction with the browser. So when the test tool mimics a user typing something into a field, the automated test tool should mimic this, and then the system should behave just as it would as if it was a real user, interacting with the underlying code and passing back the results to the user interface, and then back to the automated test tool to check the result is as expected. Test frameworks that are based on Jasmine are not as well suited to browser-based testing, and I'll explain why. It's basically because they execute additional JavaScript code which interacts sorry, my phone's going off there, which interacts with the underlying code, and the system should behave as it would with a real user, passing back the result to the Jasmine test engine. In effect, Jasmine-based test frameworks are all about writing more JavaScript code to test JavaScript code. This kind of testing can unfortunately lead to false positive test results being reported, and an example scenario where this occurs is outlined in our white paper in more detail. Now, fortunately, Gartner have helped us with this aspect. In their May 2016 report, they state that Selenium is the de facto standard for testing browser-based applications. So that narrows down your choices immediately to tools that are based on Selenium. That is, if you want to test ServiceNow from a user's perspective, which is the most common use. Costly mistake number 2 is to ignore compliance and quality. So anyone who has been through ISO certification, as I have many times unfortunately, knows that being able to demonstrate to the auditor a trail of testing is vital to gaining certification. So that means that data created during the test must be kept in order to be able to follow the audit trail in the future. Similarly, any screenshots taken during automated testing must be an exact image of the screen, not a recreation. So John Chun, in his developer blog that he posted recently, identified during his testing of Istanbul's ATF that the screenshots taken were not exact images of the screen, probably because they were recreated using JavaScript code. It's essential that these are accurate in order to pass certification. Number 3, don't ignore usability. So when choosing a platform, you need to think about what sort of tests you're going to do and who's going to do them. Is it someone technical, in which case they will be content writing some blocks of code? Or will it be analysts or business users, in which case a user interface that mimics what the user is going to do will be more successful? It is really easy to underestimate the impact poor usability will have on the success of a test automation tool. One that is complex and cumbersome will quickly be not put to one side and not used, and the scripts not maintained. Number 4, how are you going to manage defects? The amount of effort that is spent managing defects raised as a result of testing is always vastly underestimated. Raising defects manually is a time-consuming and error-prone process, which can often leads to frustration and conflict between, say, the developers and the testing team. How many times have you seen defects bounce backwards and forwards between tester and developer, with the developer saying, cannot recreate, closed? This is because either not enough detail is added to the defect, or the context of how the tester got to the point where the defect was observed has not been provided. Or perhaps a screenshot has not been included. So solutions are now available that automatically raise and manage defects as part of the test automation platform, and this gives rise to significant efficiency gains. Reduced operating costs, remove the possibility of conflict between the developer and the tester, of course, as well. Number 5 is lifecycle documentation. So producing documentation at each stage of the software delivery lifecycle is probably one of the most onerous and time-consuming tasks, particularly as the documentation produced at each stage of the lifecycle is really an elaboration or different perspective or presentation, if you like, of the same content. And that content, at the heart of it, is the business scenario. Typically, these artifacts are written in various Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, etc., etc. And the content is only adjusted slightly from one stage of the life cycle to the next. Screenshots are normally manually copied and pasted into documents. This means if the screen layout changes, you have to redo every document where the screen appears. It's all very time-consuming, very resource-hungry. It's a rather tedious task and prone to mistakes and errors because humans are involved. Some solutions combine automated testing capability with the automatic creation of common artifacts such as requirements documents, design documents, even standard operating procedures, user guides and training guides. This can significantly reduce the costs associated with operating ServiceNow and speed up release cycles dramatically. Number 6 is a move towards a DevOps vision. So Forrester, in their February 2017 report, identified that in order to realize the DevOps dream, you currently have to piece together a number of different tools in order to automate the complete life cycle. They did, however, note that the situation is improving, and visionary automated test solutions are looking beyond just automated testing towards continuous integration testing, which enables continuous delivery, which of course in turn enables more frequent releases. In order to realize the DevOps dream, every stage of the software delivery lifecycle needs to be automated, not just the testing phase. And once you can automate every stage, you reduce your risks on releases and upgrades. And of course, by doing that, you improve the quality of service to your users and your customers. You lower your operational costs. You speed up release cycle times and improve control over the whole process. So number 7 is the single pane of glass view. So this is really important, that you're able to manage your software delivery lifecycle all in one place, whether that be your requirements backlog, your defects, your test results, your requirements and acceptance criteria, and so on. Having a single location to manage it all in will mean that you remain controlled at all times. ServiceNow, of course, provides the SDLC module for software project lifecycle management. It's now introduced the automated testing framework, and that's in addition to the existing testing framework for manual testing. And the difficulty is having those 3 locations is that your testing is distributed, making it difficult to stay in control of the overall test strategy and to really assure yourself that the risk to your business is being fully managed. Number 8, anywhere you can go, I can go. So this is a really important one. Your chosen automated testing tool needs to be able to emulate the actions of your users as closely as possible. Otherwise, it won't be testing the platform as if a user was using it. And this is slightly different to number 1 that we covered earlier. Again, I know this sounds obvious, but things like, for example, being able to test that a user can or cannot see a menu option, these are vital elements of testing and can cause major disruption to a business if defects are missed in these areas. Number 9 is internal automation projects are very likely to fail. So it's really easy to believe that writing your own automated test scripts for ServiceNow is a good way to go. How hard can it be? Well, I'm afraid the answer is very hard indeed. Developers will of course tell you that there are numerous free test frameworks available where they can quickly record and play back tests, for example. However, much pain lies in this approach, and you really will end up with what we call brittle tests, which will break the next time there's a ServiceNow release, and you'll end up doing the whole thing again. Now, normally developers are also not that great at producing documentation of what they've done. So if they leave your organization, you could run the risk of having an unmaintainable set of tests on your hands, which no one knows how to operate. And if you want to do the testing again, you have to start again with another developer, or in the worst case, go back to testing manually. But also, it's a sad fact that most internal projects do not have a good track record of succeeding, and it's almost a 1 in 2 chance of being a costly, time-consuming, and rather embarrassing failure for all involved. So number 10, and the last one, is think about test independence. So by no means the least important one, just because it's number 10. The first page of any testing manual that you read, or a book about testing, it will tell you that the further you are removed, or your testing is removed from the person who developed the code, the better the testing is. So to mitigate as much risk as possible, you need to choose a solution which is as independent as possible from the underlying platform being tested, and certainly as far away as possible from those that have developed it. Solutions that test and interact with the browser independent from the platform vendor are of course then going to offer far more risk reduction and protect you and your business from embarrassing defects escaping into production. So I've been through the 10 most costly mistakes, but obviously there is much more detail in the white paper, and that's available to download from our website at the link shown on the screen. Also, if you just visit our website, there's links through to that section of the website, so they're easy to find. Now I'm just looking, and I'm pleased to say that whilst I've been talking, we've had lots of really great questions coming in. So the second half of the webinar, we will work my way through those, and hopefully I'll be able to cover them all. But if I don't, what we're going to do is post all of the questions and answers onto the website alongside the a link to the recording of the webinar. So you can watch the webinar again at your leisure, or you can forward a link to a colleague if you think they would be interested. So I'm just going to look at the first question that came in was from Phil, and he asked, you mentioned that Jasmine tests can give false positives. Can you give an example of this? Yeah, so the example that we outline in the white paper is one that I'll use here, and this is where a field on a form is a particular field on a form is in a tabbed section of that form, but the tab is hidden from view from the user by a client script when the page is loaded. So the test for the user to be able to fill in this field should fail because the user obviously cannot actually get to that field because the tab is hidden. So if we take the example of a Jasmine-based test, this would incorrectly pass this test because it would interact at the code function level, and the code for that function actually exists on the page. Jasmine has no way of knowing that the tab is actually hidden, so it passes the test incorrectly. So contrast this with a browser or Selenium-based test solution, such as Autotest Pro. This test would correctly fail because the user would be unable to click on the tab in order to get to the field to fill it in. So this really highlights the importance of exactly mimicking the user's interaction with the browser and at the browser level, rather than at the unit code function level, which is the case with tools based around Jasmine. Of course, this is just one scenario they've come up with. There are other and numerous other scenarios where this would also be the case. And the only way to be sure of the results really is to use something that mimics the user's interaction with a browser, as we've discussed in this webinar. So just looking at the next question, which is from which is from Adam. And he asks, you mentioned continuous integration testing. Can you describe what this is? Yeah, so we talked about continuous integration testing in the context of DevOps, and really continuous integration testing is the next step on from automated testing, and because it moves you closer to being able to do continuous delivery, and therefore closer towards a DevOps. So imagine if you've just completed an upgrade of ServiceNow and you have run all your regression tests in Autotest Pro. So you know everything in your system is working exactly as it should be. That's a working and known configuration. But of course, you don't want to stop there, and you want to continue to make changes to your ServiceNow configuration, make more changes. So what you do is you move that regression test pack into continuous integration testing mode. And this means that those tests will run continuously in the background on one of our servers. And what you will see is a dashboard of whether the test has passed or failed every time it is run. And this just repeats, cycling through, running. As soon as it finishes, it runs again and again and again, and so on. So you get a dashboard update, a red or a green status every time the test runs, say every 3 or 4 minutes, or however long the test takes to run. What this really means is that you can then make configuration changes, and as long as that dashboard indicator stays showing green, you can be assured that the change you have made will not have any adverse impact on your users of the system. So in effect, it is continuously regression testing whilst you are developing. Hence the term continuous integration testing, or sometimes known as CIT. Hopefully, so as long as that continuous integration indicator is green, you can release the changes you have made into production, and you can do that in complete confidence that it won't affect your users. This means, for example, you could release that change immediately, there and then, or at the end of the day, or at the end of that week. As long as that indicator is green, then you know you're okay. So this really makes daily or even hourly releases possible, and you can really start to realize the full benefits from ServiceNow. So thank you for that question. I'm just looking down, just checking the time as well. Yeah, we've got time for more questions, which is good. So we have another question from Andras, which is, do you think automated testing can be used for user acceptance testing? So that's a really good question. And I'm just thinking, perhaps a good topic for another white paper, as this may be quite a lengthy discussion. I think traditionally the answer would have been no, you shouldn't use automated testing for user acceptance testing. But actually, in my view, it could well be yes, and I'll explain why I think that. So user acceptance testing is all about following a business scenario that a typical user would follow when using the system. So it follows that if you define those user acceptance business scenarios in a tool that allows you to do that, then you should be able to automate a good proportion of the user acceptance testing. Now, there is a however. I will say that automated testing will never completely replace the need for some amount of manual testing. And it's one of those things that the human eye is extremely good at seeing things that just don't look right, whereas computers are extremely bad at this. So, for example, screen layout defects are really hard to automatically test for. Not impossible, and in fact we are looking at doing some research into screen image comparisons and so on. So it may be something we can do in the future. Overall, though, I think that something like Autotest Pro that is centered around business scenarios rather than code function testing do lend themselves to being able to perform a large proportion of regression and user acceptance testing, although with the caveat that this should always be supplemented by a human test as well. So I hope this answers your question, Andras, and I think I will definitely consider that for as a candidate for a white paper. So I think that's an interesting topic to potentially cover off. So we have 6 minutes left by the clock, so I will answer another couple of questions if we can squeeze them in before we have to wrap up. I've got one here. The next one down is from Helen, and she asked, what are the typical savings from testing automatically? Okay, so that's another great question, of course, one that we get asked a lot to help people with. So we draw on our experience of having done automated testing over the years, and In fact, in order to help people with this particular question, we've built a return on investment model, which allows you to plug in various parameters about your implementation of ServiceNow, your testing regime and methods, the frequency of releases, number of test scenarios and scripts, and so on. And we run that through our calculation, our ROI algorithms, and we're able to provide a series of tables and charts, graphs, and so on that allow you to see the typical benefits that you would gain from the use of a DevOps tool such as Autotest Pro. I can say that as a rough guide, typical savings for the first release, where obviously in the first release you need to build your test scenarios the first time around. So the savings are less in the first release, but still they're typically between 40 and 50% more efficient in the first release. And in subsequent releases, once those have been built, it's typically around 70 to 80% more efficient. So huge savings to be had from automating the testing. And again, it's a great question and something we may cover off in a future webinar. Just looking at the time, we have some more time available, so I'll take the next question. Was from Peter, and that is Autotest Pro an application? And the answer is yes, it is. It is a module that you install onto your ServiceNow instance, so that when you're building your scripts, your scenarios, it picks up your configuration of any custom modules or actions or menus, etc. that you've added. And then the front-end controller application talks to a hosted server that we host, which has a Selenium-based test engine on it, which actually processes the tests and passes the results back into your ServiceNow application. So that hopefully answers your question, Peter. Patrick asked, can I have a demo of Autotest Pro? And yes, we'll get back to you on that one, Patrick, so thank you for that. Next question is from Dominique, and she asks, does Autotest Pro test any other application other than ServiceNow? Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it does only test at the moment ServiceNow, but we are looking to extend its reach potentially in the future to other cloud platforms. Those would include, or the ones that are under consideration are Salesforce and SAP, and potentially SharePoint as well. So that is something we'll be looking to do in the future. So you'll be able to test across your key applications from one location and do true integration testing across those. So I think we're probably out of time before I can't quite fit another question in. So as I said, there are a couple of other questions that were posted, so I will put those on the website alongside the link to the recording, so everyone will get a response to your question, I can assure you. And a quick plug for our next webinar, which is going to be on the subject of DevOps in ServiceNow. We've touched on that in this webinar, but we'd like to describe how we really realize a DevOps vision with the use of ServiceNow. We also have a stand at Knowledge 17, so if you're attending that event, it would be great if you could pop along and come and see us and meet the team, have a demonstration, have a chocolate, etc. And I've got hardly any time left just to say thank you for joining the webinar. I hope you found it enjoyable and useful, and thank you again for attending, and I'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.